I was in this morning's seminar making a rather outrageous suggestion. Instead of the attitude that we are either objects of fate, which are puppets manipulated by natural forces, and instead also of the attitude, if you can't lick them, join them, that is to say, as it were, pretend that everything that happens is just the way you really intended it to happen. There is still something else which is intuited in all forms of mystical experience, which is not that you have to pretend anything, but that in exactly the same way as your own organism keeps functioning without your apparently having anything to do with doing it, that process is continuous with, is one process with, all the behavior going on around you of other people, of nature, and of the entire universe. And as you contemplate this possibility, you, shall I say, begin to get the feel of it. And there is a curious point where a concept, which after all this is a kind of concept, slips over into getting a knack of actually feeling that's the way it goes. It's exactly the same sort of thing as getting, say, the feel of the wind in sailing, where you need to keep a certain tautness, shall I say, in the sail. Keep up a kind of even pressure. It's the same as in many, many other skills, where there comes a point of getting a knack, and at every moment of getting the knack, you have the curious sensation that this which you are doing is doing itself. You get, when you first remember riding a bicycle, when you first actually swam, don't you remember the feeling of somehow it is doing it, rather than I am doing it in the ordinary way? It happened. You know, look, Mama, no hands. And so in respect to what I'm talking about, there is a point at which it becomes perfectly clear to you that you are not something struggling against everything else or being victimized by everything else, but that what is going on, insofar as you can experience it, is your own doing. And the flip from one state to the other is just like getting the knack in swimming, riding a bicycle, or any other athletic or artistic activity. But then at that point, you see, you become, from the world's point of view, crazy. You become a divine madman. And at that point, you are able to practice what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. Be not anxious for the morrow, what you shall eat, what you shall drink, and wherewithal you shall be clothed. You know, that passage is the most subversive passage in the New Testament. And I have never yet heard a sermon in which any preacher seriously advocated it. They say, well, that's a very high ideal. It might have been all very well for Jesus, who was God. And yeah, but people like that, you see, are regarded as completely irresponsible by the clergy in general. See? And somebody actually goes out because they say, those hippies aren't really doing it, because they are relying on money from home, which is earned by their square father, or from scrounging. And there's still not quite the attitude of, let it all go. But you see, if you are a really genuine divine madman, you are not necessarily at the same time an irresponsible being. Perhaps one of the best examples of a divine madman was a Japanese Zen monk by the name of Ryokan. He was a poet and a kind of a solitary, lived in a little cottage on a hill, and would appear to be completely naive. But I want to give you a story about Ryokan, which shows how a divine madman relates to the practical world. One day, he was invited to a house, I suppose a fairly wealthy home, because he was much prized as a guest, and he went into the reception room and sat down, was served tea, and then when he thought he was alone, he was looking around, and he saw a hanging scroll where there was a painting of a tiger. And he looked at it, was delighted, it was great, and he said, you know, and had a great time playing tiger. And suddenly he noticed that there was still present in the room, sitting very quietly, a servant maid. And he looked at her and said, "Shh, don't you tell anybody about that. They'll think I'm crazy." At another time, he was sitting outside his little hut, and he had finished dinner, and he had put his rice bowl, on top of one chopstick, and was spinning it like this. And suddenly, a messenger came from a local daimyo, that is to say, noble dignitary, and asked him some important question as to whether he could possibly attend, I don't know what it was, a special tea ceremony or something like that. And all he could answer was, "The bowl keeps spinning." Messenger went back and said, The master says the bowl keeps spinning. On another occasion, he did very, very interesting calligraphy, though nobody can read it except very great experts, because it looks as if an inky spider had crawled down the page. But it's highly prized, and today specimens of Ryokan's writing sell for thousands of dollars. And people were always therefore asking him if he would do a specimen, and he was kind of cagey about it and reluctant. So one day, a very cunning nobleman invited him to his house and laid out on the mat some absolutely gorgeous writing paper, great long strips of it, with inkstone already full of ink, brushes and everything just sitting there. And Ryokan went into the room and sat waiting for the host to arrive. And he walked over and looked at this gorgeous paper and the brushes and sniffed around, and then absolutely couldn't resist the temptation to write a poem down the scroll. Then suddenly he realized he'd done something awful, because after all, this was the most expensive paper you could get, and he didn't realize that it was laid out for him to do something. He just thought, it was there somehow. And then at that moment the host walked in, and Ryokan said, "Oh, I'm horrified, I'm so sorry, I just couldn't resist the temptation." The host said, "That's perfectly all right, don't worry about it at all, please." He removed the sheet. "Try another one." Ryokan also loved to play with children. All crazy people do, because you can get away with things with children that you can't with other people. Now, while I just want to put a sort of interspersed remark here, I don't approve really of baby talk, because I think that's insulting to children. It somehow makes them into dolls. But absolutely different from baby talk is play talk. What I mean, not play talk as distinct from work talk, but dancing talk. You can do things, you can make faces at children, you can let yourself go in the company of children in a way that you can't with other people. And that's why there is a certain point in life as children grow up, somewhere around 5, 6, 7, where they become spoiled. And they become embarrassed by your really hassling with them anymore in that way. So Ryokan loved to play with children. And he used to play all sorts of games of hide-and-seek with them, and one day he was it. And he had to go off and stay in a certain place, and all the children went to hide, and then they'd say, "You who?" and he'd start to find them. So he went off to hide, and no yoo-hoo. So he waited, stayed there all night, waiting for this. And the children just made a joke on him and ran off, you see. Well, one says, you see, that's not a very practical man. But he was adored by everybody. He was a kind of cherished village idiot, who was yet very much respected, because everybody knew that in truth he was the only person in the village who was without basic fear, and who was therefore living life as a Zen monk who is called an unsui. This is the two words, cloud, sui, water. And he is given this name. Every monk is called an unsui, because he's supposed to drift like a cloud and flow like water. And this is exactly, you see, the same spirit as not being anxious for the morrow, and going along with the grass of the field, and the fowls of the air. One day Confucius was out for a walk with his disciples, and he saw an old man fall into a big mountain stream and thought, "Alas, he is sick and old and tired of life," and he's making off with himself. For below the point where he fell in, there was an enormous cataract, and then rocks and rapids underneath. But suddenly, the old man appeared way down below the rapids, crawled out of the stream, and went strolling along the banks. Confucius was amazed, and he immediately sent a disciple to run after the old man so that he could talk to him. He said, "Sir, I thought you were about to make away with yourself, but I see now that you must be a spirit." And he said, "No, I'm not a spirit, I'm just a perfectly human being." "Well then, how did you survive the cataract?" He said, "In no special way. I just went in with the swirl and came out with the whirl. I did nothing, I simply adapted myself to the nature of the water." And so, in the same way, we have connected with the Taoist and Zen, early Zen traditions, many instances of famous monks who were quite mad. On the Esalen announcement for this series of workshops and seminars, there is a drawing of Han Shan, and he and his companion Shota, or the Japanese say Hansan, and Jitoku. They were two mountain hermits who are favorite subjects of Zen artists, because they are shown wandering about together in the woods, laughing at falling leaves, and a Sengai used to like to draw them with the sutras open, chanting away with their hair all frazzled, and laughing, chanting the sutras, and really not paying any attention to what they mean at all, but just having a ball making these noises. But as a matter of fact, Hanshan was an extraordinarily competent poet, in perfect control of the language when he needed to be. But all that control, mastery, was somehow based on the attitude of what we will call fundamental nonsense. Fundamental goofing off, because you really don't need to make life work. The point is, you see, these two ways of being are not incompatible. They appear to be incompatible when you think that the foundation of everything is the tough discipline. Now that's basic. It is not basic. It's secondary, and it's an important secondary. But you can't really make it work unless you build it on top of the primary, which is the goofing off attitude of the child. To learn an excellent discipline and to learn it well, you've got to goof your way into it. In other words, you have to learn, say, in drawing, how to make very fine lines by getting absorbed in doodling them. See, do it not because there's anything special to be accomplished, but just because it's such a gas to make the brush go in a certain way like that. When you practice calligraphy, for example, Western calligraphy or Chinese calligraphy, you begin to dig the amazing shapes that a brush can make, and you play with your hands just as it goes so. You're not trying to please anybody, the master, or make an impression. You're just digging that brush. The Chinese are very clever about this because they make writing such a delight. For example, they perfume the ink, and it has very subtle perfume. It is extremely great. And then they rub the ink on a stone in water, and it makes a beautiful blue-black mixture. And the feeling of sliding this stick back and forth on the inkstone is just as groovy as can be, especially when the ink begins to get thick and smooth, and the feeling of rubbing that, and you get this satisfactory sense. Then when you feel it's just right, you pick up the brush, and for a while you play with the brush, with the point getting it just to the right quality that you want. And then, to write, you learn to dance with the brush on the paper. And here again is the thing of knack, that when you write correctly, you feel it is doing it. Now, do you see the spirit in which underneath the accomplishment is playfulness? That it doesn't matter. And I found in studying the bringing up of children, education, and so on, that a child gets completely discouraged when you tell that child that it is absolutely important that success be attained in a certain task. Well, it just has to be done. I mean, there is no alternative. You've got to do it. See, you've got to be able to do this, to learn it, to achieve this distinction, or whatever it is. And that's like pushing the child and knocking him down. It's totally discouraging, because if you must do it, the feeling is, I don't think I shall ever be able to. So instead, every good teacher stirs up interest, takes it that goofing off is basics, but subtly, by a kind of judo, arranges the goofing off to go in this way. So then, the world may be taken then to be fundamentally mad, crazy, or a basic life is crazy life, because it's nonsense. The death poem of a great Zen master was, I have uttered nonsense from the bathtub to the bathtub. The bathtub in which the baby is washed at birth, the bathtub in which the corpse is washed before cremation, that's the two terms of life. And so all his Zen teaching, all his carryings on were just, he said, just stuff and nonsense. Because here we are, you know, we think we make sense. I'm talking English to you, and you understand the meaning of my words. But let's just drop this situation into another context. What is the meaning of your understanding what I'm saying? See, we're all sitting around here, and you are listening to these signals, and you are interpreting them into signals of your own. But look at the situation from above. What a crazy assembly, because what we're doing, gathering here, making noises, and very complicated noises, is essentially no different from what this tree is doing out here, spreading out its branches with all these little twigs and things sticking out. And my joke, what is it doing? Well, you see, if we look at it from a practical point of view, those leaves have a purpose, and they are to absorb moisture and sunlight, and to sort of go down into the tree and help the sap to come up. And then the real object of this is that it grows some kind of flower or cone, and that gets fertilized, and little seeds inside, and they come out and fall on the ground and get blown about, and some get picked up by birds and distributed, and they make other trees, you see. That's the thing. That's what it's all about. That's a very, very important function. Now, actually, it's sheer nonsense. It's this tree is going patootie-too, patootie-too. And they say, wowee, isn't that great, you know? Let's spread this around and get everybody else going patootie-too, patootie-too. Well, we're doing exactly the same thing. And the trouble with us as civilized people is we don't know it. We think we're being serious. And we have tremendously important schemes going on. And that it's desperately vital that, for example, the human race survive. And that we go on with this great thing called civilization, the United States of America, the USSR, whatever it is. And we think, that's the great thing we have to do. But that's what's destroying us. Because nobody is going to blow up the world with an atom bomb for the sake of patootie-too, patootie-too. Laughter. Now, life is this fundamentally directionless, wandering, cloud-like, river-drifting play. And yet I occasionally use the word we should understand. And just as I pointed out earlier on, there's the problem that when you see that the world is like this, and that you're all one with it, and it's your doing, then you get it absolutely clear in your mind. It is very clear indeed. Then you suddenly want to explain it to somebody, and you find there are no words for it. Well, so in just the same way, when one is trying to say, this is what we should do, there seems to be a complete contradiction, and there's a verbal and logical hang-up here that it's difficult to get across if you keep on using words. It's only words that are making the difficulty. There is no difficulty in practice. So, I'm saying, in words, you should do something that you really can't help doing anyhow. Because you're thinking about it in words, you don't realize it. You don't realize that you are doing it anyhow because you're thinking about it in words. And therefore the problem arises, why am I saying you should do it when you can't help doing it anyway? So, the words I'm using are getting in the way of the message or of the meaning. So that this could be called understanding this to be so. That we should be madmen in the sense of abandoning this whole project of the survival of the race, civilization, and so on. That this is the only way in which we can restructure human life and unplug various purely abstract and political engines that are totally destructive. But you see, you can't unplug them if you're still afraid of them. If you're still fundamentally worrying about what is going to happen to civilization, it's only when you see, in your own inner experience, that it simply doesn't matter. That what is important is what is unimportant, which is the jazz. And that is important. Not that it should go on, but in the doing thereof. So, this creates what some people might call a new political strategy, which we will call the politics of diversion. That is to say, living a style of life which everybody sees that we're enjoying and is so great, they'll say, oh, I wish we could be like that. No, but we've got to be earnest and all that kind of thing, you see. But that doesn't really achieve much except trouble. It is through application and study and earnestness that we have the atom bomb. We say, well, now, look at all the things we civilized people have achieved. Ah, yeah, but you're about to blow up the planet, which seems to be the price of it. But here again, let me underline the fact that I'm not trying to talk down technical skill. I'm only trying, and let me repeat the point, that you cannot employ non-hostile, non-destructive technical skill unless you realize basically that you yourself are this whole domain of nature. That's the real you. You are not in a fight against nature. You're not here to conquer nature because there's nothing to conquer. It's all you. And so when you use technology to bulldoze everything into submission, you're fighting yourself. You're all tied up, clutched up, like the person trying to lift himself off the floor by his own bootstraps. And in that process, you're dissipating all your energy on something that can't be done. And therefore you're just getting tired out, and you're going to drop dead. So I know, you see, that there are paradoxical elements in this. But I repeat, the paradoxes appear because of the nature of the language. When we try to explain these things, We run into contradictions for the simple reason that we are trying to explain it. To put it into a language with either-or categories in it, where you say either you try or you don't try, either you let things go as they will, or you do something about it. Either there is something you can do, and therefore you should do it, or there's nothing you can do, and therefore no one should say should. No one should say should. See, look how messed up you get. But that's the way these difficulties arrive at the linguistic level. These difficulties are not arising at what I will call for the moment the material or the real level, because there, at that domain, you will find yourself acting in a way that is in many ways more intelligent than you act when you make up your mind. But that, you see, that simply living in complete natural spontaneity, that's the way of the child. That may be the way of the animals, we don't know. But certainly, as a child is irresponsible in that sense and begins to learn responsibility and so on, we must be terribly careful to realize that irresponsibility is the basis of responsibility. That if we destroy the basic irresponsibility, the consequent style of responsibility that we learn is useless, because it's all for nothing. It's all to a process of continuing with anxiety and guilt and uptightness, and making more and more and more of it by a kind of Parkinson's law. You see what's happening? If we succeed in business in the ordinary way, what does that lead to? More business. So I say we get rid of this business and hand it over to the computers, so they will do all the accounting. Then what? Oh, we'll think up some new kind of business, see? And then we'll have to hand that over to computers because it's so boring. And that means new, more investments, bigger things, going chickadee-chick, but it's all machinery. You think this is a great erection? It never comes off. It never comes off.